what matters is the act of creation. It's the process. It's that you are putting something that you believe in out there. And you will, if you really believe in it, you will be doing that.
Firstly, I just want to thank you for your time and the opportunity to even talk about this film, Land of Gold. It's I have so many things to ask and say about it, but it's really a great film. For those who don't know, it's about this Sikh truck driver Kiran who finds this Mexican American girl, Elena, in his truck and decides to help her reconnect with her family. It's a really beautiful story about two people from different worlds, but they find a lot of commonality. And I think you can tell me personally, Nardeep, if that was the point, if that was kind of like the story, at the focal point of the story. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. First off, thanks for having me and having this conversation. I'm really thrilled about it. Yeah, I mean, look, I think for me, when I'm thinking about what is the South Asian American narrative and how do we push it forward, right? Like we've been telling stories for a while now. We're getting more access. We're really at this beautiful inflection point right now where we're producing a lot of stuff that's about us and more importantly by us.
Hmm.
And I think I'm constantly thinking about, okay, how can we push the narrative? How can we stretch it? How can we do something different? And for me, when I think of the South Asian experience, for me, it's intersectionality with other communities, right? Like, we've been in the US for a while, but it's always been in relation to other folks, and it's been in relation and like our ability to be here is in relation to other folks, other communities, the Black community, the Latino community, like so this film, I wanted to kind of explore this idea of it, our issues are our issues, and we have our own challenges and our traumas that we are unpacking, but we're not alone. And, by community and being in community with other folks, we can actually grow much faster than we could by ourselves. And, this Punjabi Mexican connection that's in the film, I'm homaging this like rich history from the, early 1900s during the Asian Exclusion Act, which was an immigration ban the United States passed because, the United States loves immigration bans. The Punjabi community that was stranded in America started marrying and forming bonds with the Mexican community that was migrating here and formed this Mexican Punjabi community that's really beautiful. And I didn't know about it until I started researching it because of finding, Punjabi, Indian, Mexican restaurant hybrid restaurants in LA.
Hmm.
So once I learned about that, I was like, oh, right, we're not an immigrant class that just came in the 60s. Our initial migration was earlier, you know. So this was sort of my homage to that sort of rich cultural history and that intersectionality, and that cross-cultural sort of blending and sharing that I think just deepens both the individual experiences and the collective experience.
Yeah, I mean, similar to you, I'd only recently discovered within the last few years about that history.
Yeah,
I did a whole video and posted and everything. It was really
yeah,
interesting because it was just the idea of like, I know like gurdwaras were formed and like these joint like families were going to gurdwara, right? Like it was, so it's just like, and I think it was around 400 families, if I remember correctly,
yeah,
were like, yeah, and sadly like that has changed because once immigration laws have changed, and then a lot of other things, the biases and prejudices that exist, unfortunately, but like still, like as you said, it still exists to some degree. And the
yeah.
fact that it shows like we can come together when we need to or want to. I think that was really a big takeaway for me from both like the history and then the movie. And So one question I had about the movie was in terms of like, so as I mentioned in a video I made, I like how the principles of the Sikh faith get explored, and they're so seamlessly woven into the narrative. I think that's my favorite aspect of it, is that it's not like, oh, this is what Sikhi is, and you do this, and like it wasn't like a teaching. It was, either Elena asking questions or sometimes just visually. The scene where they go to the Gurdwara is probably my favorite because there's no dialogue other than some whispering, right? But it's just them just there. There's
Yeah.
kirtan playing, and it's just like one of the most beautiful. Like I feel like people get to actually experience what it is like in a way. And so like, what did the process look like for working out how to explore Sikhi in that way?
Yeah, I'm so glad it resonated with you because that I did a lot of work to make sure that flowed the way that I think you experienced it. I think as BIPOC filmmakers, we're constantly, having to bleed our traumas on screen, and we're
Hmm.
constantly having to teach audiences about us to give them a basis of why we are dealing with situations the way we deal with, right? So this man who's maybe rejected his faith, but he's still, got the Sikhi in his heart. He can't run away from that. And like the movie explores that. I wanted to like that is so important to why he's doing what he's doing with Elena. Like that fundamental choice to shepherd her across the country. It's kind of a crazy choice,
Yeah.
but if you've grown up in the Sikh faith, it's not that crazy because the very major tenet of it is service. It's seva, right?
Hmm.
So for me, I was like, okay, I have this privilege, this opportunity to put a Punjabi Sikh character and to explore Sikhism in a way that it's never been really seen like this in the West on this scale. And I didn't want to do like the Punjabi Sikh film, like I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to be a movie that like anybody could watch and enjoy, but then learn something about it. So weaving in the Sikhi was like, okay, if he's living this thing, but he's not recognizing what he's doing, maybe his mom is going to compliment him about it and mention Guru Nanak and say something like, oh, you're living his tenets, but I'm not going to explain what that is. I'm not going to explain
Mm.
what, this prophet like, like really gave us. Going to the Gurdwara again, like he doesn't really go there himself, but he remembers his father taking him there. He remembers the things like those are ingrained in him,
Yeah.
covering all that stuff, right? And so to me, experiencing all that stuff through him and his version of that, because that's the other thing too. Like there's part of the diaspora is accepting the fact that everything is different and everyone has their version of something, right? So like I was like, this is my version of Sikhism. This is like how I practice it now, right? And maybe I'm not a man of religion, but I am a man of faith and spirituality. And I'm kind of rambling here, but the idea is that like weaving it all through family and his discovery of the stars and all of these things kind of have informed who he is, and he may not even know that it's in him until he's doing the thing and someone calls him out on it. Um, which to me I thought made it so much more beautiful and then became something that was just sort of experienced and not preached. Because I think that's the challenge of some of this stuff. Like when no one's experienced it, it's like I can teach you about Sikhism, I can teach you about Islam, I can teach you about any of this stuff. But to see someone live with it and struggle with it and question it, I think is far more powerful and makes what they're exploring a lot more palpable and textured. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've experienced that myself. I'm at a certain place with my journey, and I talk a lot about my journey on my platform,
Hmm.
and people are just very uh they feel very welcomed, I've found, like based on
Yeah.
their comments, because I'm literally just sharing my experience. I'm never saying like this is what you must do as a Sikh, or this is what Sikhism is about. I mean, like I do, but like you know what I mean? Like I'm not
Yeah.
forcing people to accept my understanding of it. I'm just saying
Yeah.
this is how I understand it, this is how I practice it, this is how I live it, this is how I'm attempting to get better at it too. So I show that like I'm not perfect. I don't think I'm like the best Sikh in the world. Like so
And what does that even mean, right? Like,
right.
like what metric is that? Like, if you go to Punjab, someone's going to be like, "Oh yeah, you suck. You're
Yeah.
not a man of the
Yeah.
cloth. Like, you don't know what you're doing."
Yeah.
Like this concept of piety and what is the right way to do things, I think is all just like it's all like works against the very tenets of what you're trying to do when you're believing in something, when you've chosen to believe in something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really vibe with how you have the conversation. Again, like personal experience is where it's all about.
Yeah. And I didn't note that, like, I mean, I remember the mother talk mentioning like the Guru Nanak's teachings, but I didn't note that part about like, oh yeah, they didn't explore it, like they didn't go into like, oh yeah, he says that, like, and that's a so that was really, yeah, I didn't even think about that. It's really cool that like I was just like, oh wait, yeah, there was no explanation, because like you said, we're always explaining, but what this
Yeah.
movie does for the most part, like obviously there's some things you have to explain to a degree, but
Yeah. The
having
turban, the beard, like that stuff, or like there's some logistical things to
yeah,
understand. Like I like, and again, that's the balance you were asking, right? The balance of like exploring the concepts of faith, the tenets, that kind of stuff. I was like, let me just mention it briefly, and then let's just see it in
yeah,
action, right? Like let it be a thematic thing. But then
right.
there are some logistical things where it's like, okay, for an audience that's not familiar with Sikhism, are they going to really understand that his trauma is based in his father and his
Hmm.
father's loss of faith? And like, the Iqbal Deba plays Grinder in this film beautifully. And
Hmm.
he's like in the film for maybe 10 minutes,
Yeah,
but he shadows over the whole thing in this beautiful
yeah,
performance. And to see someone change so drastically in these memories, I needed the audience to have a little bit of like understanding of like, hey, this man shaving and cutting his hair and like weeping, it's not just a like he's making a like aesthetic choice.
yeah,
Like he's literally cutting off a limb here.
right.
His
Yeah,
eyes, he's cutting off a limb. So like to explain that and using Elena as a device in that sensibility, like, oh, of course, this 10-year-old is going to be curious about like, oh, whoa, this is interesting. Like, what's that?
right.
To me, I'm like, yeah, when I'm with my niece and my nephews, that's like when they were younger, that's all they would do is just ask questions,
Yeah,
and you got to answer them.
right,
Uh, so yeah, there's like a give and take of explanation versus exploration, I think.
right. But I think that was also the really smart choice because in my own experiences, when an adult sometimes asks these questions, I'm like I'm on guard a little, and that's my own fault. But like a lot of times, the questions can kind of come off judgmental or a little malicious. With a child, it's almost always just pure curiosity, and so
Yeah.
like that was the beauty I saw when the scene in particular. And remember, she saw the photo in the truck, and she's like, "Oh, is that your dad? What's that thing?" I said, and her calling it a hat didn't make me wince. Versus when like an adult calls it a hat, you know?
Right. Yeah, because like an adult, like better, but a kid is just using their references, right? And
Right,
even she like understands, like, oh, right, like Muslims wear turbans too. Like certain Muslims wear turbans, Muslims, and he's like, yeah, it's not the same. Like it's like using colloquial language and just this like he understands that she's not really going to understand, or maybe isn't giving her enough credit. Like it gets complicated in those conversations, right? But I think because there's a child that's asking this, there's a lot more leeway to explore, like you said. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it, talking about what you were talking about with the story or like the impact of his father and his life looming over, it really made me realize how relatable it is to children born here that have immigrant parents
Yeah.
because like and the way that you did it too with having like oh he still listens to the music and stuff that his dad listens to or kirtan once in a while he like always plays and it's just like you said he's not necessarily so connected to the culture and the faith in the way that maybe one would hope or expect or whatever but like he carries certain things with him that always remind him and keep him grounded in that way. And it spoke to me because I have a similar situation. I was born here in the US so I've lived here my whole life.
Yeah.
And there are certain things like my faith or like Punjabi music or whatever it is that I hold on to, but I may not be, the most Punjabi or whatever term you want to use.
Yo, I vibe with that so much. Like, so, I was born in Switzerland,
Oh,
and
okay.
my mom's side of the family, my cousins, my master, my masi, my mom, like they're all in London. They're all in England.
Hmm.
So when I grew up, I was like, okay, I'm already not fit. And I grew up like I also grew up in white America, like in a
Hmm.
like kind of like white community.
Yeah.
So like I'm this like brown kid who's born in Europe, has like a British family, Punjabi Indian family, and then my little like unit here. And then like our family friends in America were in Boston, they were in Northern California, and like that was like the Indian American experience that I had because I didn't have anything else where I grew up. So like, exploring the diaspora experience, it's with Karen was like my first opportunity to be like, hey, the diaspora experience is so fundamentally individual. Like
Yeah.
there's no like you can't put a blanket statement on like, oh, wait, okay, so you're Punjabi American, you were born here, you're first generation. I get you. I know
Yeah.
what that is. You can't just put these labels on people. Like I get like so I don't like my Punjabi is terrible right now. It's terrible. I I understand it. I fluently like when people are taught speaking it to me, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm on the train. But
Right.
because I don't get to use it, it's
Yeah.
terrible, you know. So I did this interview earlier this week, last week, and it just like went up, and like I got corrected on how you pronounce Dabba, which is,
Uh,
I kept saying Dubba. I was like 8 in the morning, but
yeah.
like I was speaking English the whole time, and when I just said the word, I'll just,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, right, my experience has given me this, and also like if I go to the UK and I'm saying Dubba, like people will understand what I'm saying. So
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
it gets so complicated, this idea of what is the experience. That's the thing. The experience is, your experience is different than my experience, right? And
Yeah.
you were born in the US. I was born in Switzerland, and we have very different experiences in relation to our faith and our family and language. Like it's, I don't know. I just find it so fascinating, but also like, again, using this film and this sort of, again, I go back to this idea of this inflection point of like the material that sort of South Asians are creating right now. Like we're able to have all of these little nuances within the experience put out there in narrative, so
Right.
that, you know, like no one's like, hopefully people stop getting on people's cases about like little things like that, because it's like, no, I mean, you know, there's a reason why these things happen. And I don't know, again, I'm on my soapbox a little bit here.
No, no, it's I completely understand because I've written like poetry about this because I'm a poet,
Yeah,
and so I've written
yeah,
works about not fitting into either box, right? Like
yeah.
here in the US by non-South Asians, but also South Asians, I'm not necessarily accepted. But then if I go to Punjab, I'm not
Yeah,
Punjabi, you know,
yeah,
like because I wasn't born there and like
yeah.
all these different things. So it's just like, well, where do I sit in the ocean? Like I don't I don't
Yeah, right,
know.
exactly. And then they'll
Like
be like, "Oh, you're the Indian Ocean. You're not Indian enough for this ocean.
yeah,
Like, go to
yeah,
the Atlantic," and they're
exactly.
like, "That's cold."
Yeah, but same, like my Punjabi's not the greatest. I've been learning, I've been getting tutored in the last
Yeah.
few years, but like
Oh,
still,
that's dope.
yeah, because I want to, and I want to write in Punjabi, and I want to, like, I'm an aspiring screenwriter, so I also want to like tell these stories,
Yeah,
specifically from like a Sardar experience, because those are that's also different, right? Like,
that is different.
and that's definitely something we don't see as much on screen in Hollywood, especially, and so it's always something which kind of brings me to my next question of like
Yeah.
what was that thought process of deciding to have Kiran be someone who's like who doesn't, I guess, identify as much with the faith, or like has their hair cut and isn't
Yeah.
like, I guess, I don't know if you'd label him a practicing Sikh, but not as devout, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, yeah. I would say it's, yeah. You know, for me, that just reflected what I knew.
Hmm.
Know, like my parents cut my hair when I was very young. My dad cut his hair when he was in London, you know,
Mm.
when my parents grew up there. I made a short film a couple years ago called Bug, which is up on YouTube, and it's about a Sardar who decides to cut his hair and shave and all that, and so I felt like I had told that version of the story.
Mm.
And I think what was interesting to me is, again, you know, that's not my experience, you know,
Right.
with that. So I haven't lived my life like that. I don't know what it's like to have those looks. I don't know what it's like to have to explain myself all the time. I explain myself for different reasons. It's not like, you know, it's just different. So I felt like
Sure.
if I was going to tell that story, could I have told that story? Sure. But it wasn't necessarily the thing that I was interested in terms of like the first generation and this idea of like generational trauma post 9/11, and how does that kid move on from that, you know? So I think
Yeah.
for me, it was like an authenticity aspect of it, where it was like, you know, I'm kind of exploring a lot of like the first generation stuff I've experienced. I mean, I'm an immigrant, but I have a first gen experience, you know? So I was using, I think, Karen and this complicated relationship with his culture and his identity to kind of explore a lot of those themes, and use the dad as like the sort of you know, that kind of traditional narrative of like, you know, the tragic narrative.
Right.
That being said, though, I would love to see like, you know, bearded turban guy like doing this movie as well, and I would love to see like in a romantic comedy, and it's just that,
Ah,
and it's in the US, you know, or
yeah.
whatever that is, and maybe that's the next movie I make. But yeah, for this one, I thought that thematically, with the things I was trying to play with about what is it to be American, and like how do you define yourself when you're caught between cultures and things like that, it just like made a lot of sense, you know,
Sure.
that he had gone down this other route, and also made narrative sense with the dad. Like the dad chose to do this. He's protecting his family at that time the way
Yeah.
he thinks he needs to. So like it made sense that like in the flashbacks, the kids have, you know, have a jura, and then in you know, modern day, neither of them do, because
Right.
at a
Yeah.
certain point, if you don't do it, you don't do it, you know.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely a lived experience too. It's not like you're alone or that story isn't, familiar. I know plenty of people who do, so it's
Yeah.
totally fair. I was
Yeah.
just curious because like I'm always striving, and I'm at part of my work as a aspiring screenwriter is to get like a Siddhar on screen and like big pictures and stuff because
Yeah.
that's the story. Those are the stories I want to tell, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just curious if there was thought that went into that. So yeah.
Yeah, there's like this story, I didn't feel like it made sense for me, but like,
True.
we talked about the Punjabi Mexican community. Like I have a story that I want to tell. It's like a dream project of mine set during the Asian Exclusion Act. And like that
Mm.
would be like Solar Heaven. Also like there's actually like a World War II movie that I want to make about
Mm.
a British regiment in Italy
Yeah.
that so like I feel like there are other stories, but those tend to be less about identity.
Yeah.
I think that's like I think that's where it is. It's like lived experience, right? Like if I'm
Right.
like this film, there's also this other thing, right? You're an aspiring screenwriter, you're an amazing poet. Like there's this thing about getting your first feature off the ground from a BIPOC perspective. It's so
Sure.
hard. And if you look at like most of these first features, mine included, they wind up very much being about identity. Because I think that's
Mm.
the industry really, really wants. And they
Right.
want a very particular exploration of that, right?
Right. Of
So like if I'm gonna have to talk about identity, it's got to be based on me. So
course.
like so like you and I have different experiences just, inherently. So I think like me to do that identity story just would feel not accurate, I think,
Sure.
or it would feel like maybe not inauthentic because it's like I would do the work, but
Yeah.
that's your story to tell.
But
That's not
yeah.
my story to tell, right? And like
Sure.
that's the thing. There should be multiple films and like we should have
Yeah.
all of these nuances and colors
Right.
out there. Yeah.
And so that I was also I'm glad you brought up like you're creating your first feature. Like what was it like? Because you wrote, directed, and are the co-lead in this film.
Yeah.
And so what was that like? And particularly what was it like directing yourself? Like how does that work? Do you innately know like that wasn't a good take and I have to do it again? Or do you have to go and check back, at
Man.
the footage?
Yeah, there were some moments where I straight up knew that I was shit and was like, yeah, I gotta do that again. Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. So, in order to make the film, like again, it's hard to make anything, right? But we won basically the biggest DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion grant in the film business. It's called the AT&T Untold Stories program. And the program is designed to give a first-time feature filmmaker trying to make their first feature $1 million to make their first film. So yeah, it's kind of nuts. Me and my team won that award, and then we had like 11 months to make this film.
Oh
So like
wow.
we had to make just a lot of decisions very quickly and like go on to production. When I was originally writing the role, I wasn't thinking of myself in it. And when we got to the casting, when we started talking about financing and everything, right? So I had an amazing producing team, the Pallavi Sastry, Kirtana Sastry, their sisters, and Simon Tofik, and everyone double dutied. Like Pallavi played Preeti, my wife in the film. Kirtana was also the casting director on the film. Simon also composed the music, the beautiful music in the film.
Wow.
Uh, and so Kirtana and I were talking about the film and casting it. And like if we're talking like basic film, like financing stuff, you have the problem of like, okay, who's going to bring in money? This is before we won the grant. Like who's the star that's going to be in the film? And like there's like 5 or 6 South Asian men in the world, like from the in the West that can pull some money and all that.
Right.
When we were really thinking they're all incredible actors, and I would have been lucky to have any of them, but I was telling a very specific Punjabi Sikh American story.
Yeah.
For me, I was like, I know I would like a Punjabi actor in this thing, someone who can understand some of this stuff and like inherently, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be moving at a pace that I was like, let's have some familiarity with this. And when we really started talking about it, I'm an actor. I've been acting for years. It's how I've been paying my rent. And Kirtana just was like, well, then you should just do it. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, I mean, look, you make sense. You're a great actor. Let's just do it. So she, Pallavi, Simon, my whole team supported me in doing this. And then when we won the grant, they also supported it. Uh,
Mm.
so I had my producing team supported me in doing it. And like with that $1 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not when you're making a
Yeah.
film. The one thing I asked them, I was like, I don't need toys. Like, I know what we're like, type of filmmaking that we're doing here is a little bit more organic, like run and gun. Like, what I want is time. for me and for Caroline, who plays Elena beautifully, she's 9. I was like, we need time because there's also like legal rules about how long
Right.
it is, right? And then so that there was that, and then it was like building this beautiful team around me that I trusted. My cinematographer Chris Lowe, who like shot the shit out of this movie, like it's gorgeous, right? It's his first feature film
Oh
uh,
wow.
as the cinematographer. We've known each other for almost 2 decades. We went to college together,
Oh,
so we are like simpatico and have that kismet. We speak the same language, so like for us, it was kind of easy street. Like we just went and did the thing. It's just the first time we had resources and a team, and like he had an amazing gaff and grip team to work and like help him craft those images. And then for myself, for the performance, and for Caroline, we had an acting coach. Her name is Kate Kugler. She is an amazing actor and writer and whatever. But I trusted her with what I was trying to do with the arc and the performance, and I wanted to create a safe space with Caroline and myself and Kate, so that if I was directing and I had to go do something else and like shift my brain, Caroline had a safe place to go to be able to like talk something out if she didn't understand what I was doing, or choreograph some physicality to, get through the scene or whatever. And Kate's amazing. Like
mm,
she's an amazing writer and actor. So she brought all of that like knowledge to this stuff. And she and I would have conversations about what was I trying to do in the scene. She knew how I wanted to arc the performance across the movie, because like it's a very slow burn.
yeah.
Uh, and she was there watching, monitor every take, and like we would confer, and she'd be like, "Oh yeah, you did it. That's great. Why don't you just give yourself another option? Like try something, or like I see what you're trying to do. It's not really conveying. Like maybe try something like that, And then
Mm,
I'd go back on camera and do like 2 takes, and then go back to monitor watch, and so it was kind of like this, a little bit of like a three-headed monster between Caroline, myself, and Kate, and then Chris and Julie, our line producer, and like it was just like my producing team. Like it really, the only way I could do that was because of this beautiful family that we built to make this
mm,
film about family.
yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of Caroline, because she is fantastic, and she's 9 years old. You said, I mean, it's just like, to because she's carrying the film alongside you. Obviously, it's like
yeah, she
Kieran's the
does the heavy
main, but
lifting.
like, yeah. So it's just like, how did you find her, and
Yeah.
then like, how did you build that? And I guess you probably touched on it a little bit. How did you build that rapport to have such good on-screen chemistry? Like, was there anything off-screen that you spent a lot of time together?
Yeah, I love that. So Kirtana, again, I gotta give her props as a cat. She's an amazing casting director, and she did a national search for a young woman to play this part. And we went through a series of auditions, a lot of amazing actors, and Caroline just kept being at the top. She just was like always there, right? Like I saw her initial audition, I was like, oh great, there's something really exciting here. Let's call her back. Did a callback, and she killed it. Like in this callback, Kirtana was reading against her. I just was watching. Mind you, this is all during the height of the pandemic, so this is
Mm,
all via Zoom that we're doing this, right? And like we filmed the movie like at the height of Delta, so like the auditions were right before that, and callback went really really well. And so then the last call was a chemistry read between me and her on Zoom, and she just killed it. And then I like improvising with my actors. I like actors who can improvise and like do that thing. So I was like, this 9-year-old, let's just see what she can do. And she just was so moving and vulnerable on a Zoom that I wound up rewriting some of the scenes because of that audition. And she did it right. She did this audition. She logged off. We said goodbye. We said bye to her mom, Abby, who's also amazing. And it was like my producers, it was Kirtana, Pallavi, and Simon on the Zoom, and we were all just silent, like processing this like amazing chemistry read. And it was Pallavi. She was like, she's a star. And we knew right then and there. And we were like, we booked her that night. So, I credit Kirtana and her casting team for really finding her, and in terms of building the relationship, I think that's something that's like really great when you work with kids. Adult actors, you can tell them to do something and it's their job. Like they're supposed to be trained to be able to change an emotion, try something new. But with kids, it's a bit different, right? They can be trained, but you're also casting a personality and like a person. You're casting a person to play these parts because you want their natural spontaneity. At least that's how I feel about kids.
mhm,
So with her, Caroline's already such a warm, like generous, loving person that she and I just vibed like right off the bat. And we had 2 days of rehearsal prior. We could only afford 2 days of rehearsal prior to the shoot. So we went through the script and we talked about the beats and the emotions and all that stuff. And then she's just really present and really spontaneous. And, I've been in, like I mentioned this, I've been an uncle for almost 18 years. It's going to be very soon 18 years. So like I've always been comfortable around kids, and I just
Hmm.
treated her like she was my family. And we would joke around. I'd let her like make fun of me, and like we just like, tease each other. And then when we get into the scenes, she just was ready to be spontaneous, which then helped me be spontaneous. And
Yeah.
like I could forget, the everything that was happening and just be in the truck cab, or like in the dabba, or like wherever. So
Yeah.
like yeah. Um
Were
I
there,
yeah,
sorry.
that's it. That's it. I was like,
Okay.
yeah, I'm good.
You mentioned the spontaneity and like that. So were there any moments that were improvised that made it to the final cut?
Yeah, there are a lot of them. So a lot of like, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, they're driving from Bakersfield, California to Boston, and we had scenes set in specific places, like, the Gurdwara, these diners, and but what I really loved about something like this is like, okay, how are they bonding? Like, what are they talking? What are those like random moments? So there's a lot of montages that I really love in this film, and a lot of those montages are all improvisation.
Oh, wow.
It's just like, okay, we have this location, get them in this wardrobe, and like then she and I would just start riffing. And I just, Chris would just like get the camera. Alistair, our sound guy, was like, oh, we were always mic'd. The idea was like if we were in costume, we were always in character. Was like the mentality that I wanted to adopt, so that if I saw something with her, Chris again being like Kismet, Alistair being Kismet, we all knew like, oh, okay, we're gonna roll. And we just start rolling, and we would find these like magic moments. I mean, one scene that comes to mind is there's a montage where we're sitting and there's windmills in the distance, and I'm cutting like apple slices for her with like a knife, and
Right.
she's like making fun of me for always wearing tan. Like that's an improvised moment, right? The burrito exchange in the Mexican restaurant, like on the road, like that I was like, yeah, okay, this is the idea, but like that was all improvised.
Oh,
Like we have this scene as a placeholder, and then I was like, all right, let's just riff. So,
right.
and Caroline was really great at that. And I credit my producing team and the rest of the crew for creating such a beautiful sort of loving environment for her to feel free to just
Yeah.
be, which was really lovely.
Yeah. I only have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
This next one, because you mentioned food. So there is the characters taste cuisine from each other's cultures.
Yeah.
Was there any exchange off screen as well? Like, was there any food share?
Yeah. I mean, look, so I cook.
Okay.
I make a great sag. I make, great chole, chana masala.
Nice.
I make all that stuff. But because production was so rapid, we didn't really get a chance to be able to do any of that. I couldn't cook for them. So unfortunately, we didn't, but we would constantly be talking about food, constantly. I mean, Caroline grew up in Long Island. She's in New York. So like
Oh
she
wait, she's from Long Island. So am
yeah,
I.
oh yeah, you
Yeah.
guys might be neighbors. Yeah, she's from Long Island. So like, all these cuisines and everything, and she's like aware of all of it. Like that's what's cool. Like she was 9 when we filmed. She's now, I think, 11. And like she she's she has access to all this like amazing stuff, and her family, credit to her family, introducing her to all this amazing stuff. So like maybe I learned more from her. You know what I mean? Yeah, but we had a lot of fun talking about food a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, while we were there. I think at the time, I mean, she's a kid, right? So she was really into candy. So we talked a lot about candy. And like I was sharing, like I was like, oh, I'm an old man now. These are the candies I loved when I was a kid. And then I would get that like 9-year-old stare of like, "Ugh, you're old."
Just
Um,
gotta give her some mitai, man. It's
she's had that. She had that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We, at the scene right after he like after the police station, they go to that like the dubba there. So we had they served us food. They like
oh,
both places that we shot at, we got the food from those places.
oh,
So
okay.
and she's actually eating it in the film. So she got to try a bunch of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny because when I made that video talking about the Mexican Punjabi community, people were like, I didn't know this, but that makes total sense. Like your foods are just like, I was like, yeah, I mean the foods just like
Yeah, I mean,
it's
I think I mentioned it before. That's like how the whole impetus of this thing started, right? It was like twofold. I was driving down, I forget which street it was in LA, maybe it was Sunset or whatever, and I saw this Mexican Punjabi, like Mexican Indian restaurant. I was like, this is perfect. Like it makes sense. Tortillas, rotis, marinated meats, tomatoes, chilies, like it all makes onions, right? It makes sense. It's all the same base. But I'm like, why has this not been done before? But also, why is it done now? Like, I just was so confused. And then also, I did a play where I played Bhagat Singh Thind. Um,
oh wow.
yeah, so like I was like learning, like I was like literally happening at the same time. And I was like learning about him, and I was like, what the hell? We were here in the early 1900s, late 1800s. This guy
Yeah.
was like fighting for citizenship. He fought in World War One. What? You know? And then like learning about Mexican Punjabi, it's just like it all kind of dovetailed, and I was
Yeah.
like, this is legit. And for those of you who are listening, if you haven't had Indian Mexican food, you should. You should find it. It's delicious. It makes sense.
Yeah. So the one question, well, as I mentioned, I'm an aspiring screenwriter, and I feel
Yeah.
like our community is slowly, like this generation is opening itself up to more or less conventional career paths.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk about representation. And I think that a big reason I want to be a screenwriter is to not only like see our own stories, but tell our own stories because that's the best way, you know. So what are like what's a piece of advice or just words of encouragement you could give to South Asians, Punjabis, Sikhs that may be considering exploring a less conventional career path?
Yeah. Uh, Try not to succumb to the fear of there not being a runway,
Mm,
right? If you go be a doctor, there's steps, lawyers, steps, engineers, steps, whatever it is. And like those professions, there are steps that you take. There's a logical progression. But if you're going into something non-traditional, I'm hoping arts become traditional. I mean, look, we're South Asian. Like the arts are like bread and butter. That's in our souls. Like I always find it so funny when it's
yeah.
like I mean, I'm speaking from the Punjabi perspective, but I think this is all South Asians. We're like, oh, you can't go in the arts, and they're watching like three Bollywood films a weekend, and they're watching like the serials on Netflix. And I'm like, who do you think makes this shit? You know what I mean? Like we're here making these things and telling these stories. Like,
Thank
you think
you.
these just like fairies? You think there's like white people are making all this shit? Like,
Yeah.
no. Um,
I know we consume so much art,
yeah,
music, Punjabi music, huge. But like, if it's your own kid, people are like, "No, don't do that." I'm like, but how do you think that song you're listening to exists?
right, exactly.
It's someone's
So
kid.
yeah, exactly. It could be your kid, and you could be listening to your own kid's music. Yeah, so I would say like for those aspiring folks, like, just be prepared and be okay with not knowing where you're going and being able to pivot and zigzag as you're pursuing the thing you're pursuing. And the other thing I would say is, it's don't worry about being perfect. And because I think that's something that I think we as South Asians, there's any Asians really, we have this burden that we put on ourselves. Maybe that's our family, maybe that's the immigrant narrative, but it's like if we're going to do something, it's got to be perfect, it's got to be the best, it's got to be that thing, right? And I think that's a lie, right? That's only going to hold us back. I think you get better by doing, you get better by creating, right? Like I imagine for you, like your first poem versus your the last poem you wrote, there's probably a massive difference in terms of that. But also stylistically, you're exploring different things and all that, right? So like I know for me, it's taken me a while to make my first feature, and part of that is me holding myself back of like, okay, no, if I'm not going to make it unless it's absolutely perfect, it's got to be like, best picture award winning type thing, because that's the only thing that matters, right?
Right.
It doesn't. What matters is the act of creation. It's the process. It's that you are putting something that you believe in out there, and you will, if you really believe in it, you will be doing that. And I think that's the big thing that I would say is like, don't worry about perfection. Just worry about doing and just do. And don't be worried about the runway not existing because, there are many trailblazers that came before us that have been doing amazing work. But the thing is, it's like we're all trailblazers because there's no one path. You can't look to like XYZ filmmaker, XYZ actor and say, oh, that's the path I'm going to take. No, because yours is going to be individual. Very much just like diaspora experiences are individualistic, so are these careers. So
Yeah.
like kind of embracing that unknown and not letting the unknown stop you, and also not letting the sort of perfection nature that we are, like that model minority colonialism thing that we have in our head, where if it's not perfect, it's not worth it. Like get that out of your head. Like just make stuff, put it out there. It'll keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and it'll find its audience.
Yeah, I 100% back that because I've had to learn that lesson myself.
Yeah.
And now when I talk to people who will ask me like, "Oh, how do I get into writing?" I'm like, "Just write, just
Yeah.
write, just perform." Like if that's what it interests you to perform, because some people just want to like release books. I'm like, "Cool, then
Yeah.
just make a book." Like whatever it is you want to do, just do it. You know, like
And
it's not going to be good right away. That's just like,
yeah,
you
you do
know,
it and then you put it out there.
mhm,
Right? Like that's the other thing. There's no point in, like, you can do it and then keep it for yourself, but then you're not making a career out of it. You got
yeah,
to be brave, you got to be vulnerable and put
yeah,
yourself there. Because like, look, you're gonna get critiques, you're gonna get ridicule, you're gonna get people
mhm,
that love it, people that hate it, all of that stuff. And that's all good because
yeah,
people, that means people are having an emotional reaction to something you created. And that's a
yeah,
beautiful thing.
yeah.
And you just take it, run with it, and then make the next thing. Like, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
I
Yeah.
used to, in order to avoid the perfectionism, when I first started performing, I would take my mother's iPad, I'd rest it up against my dresser, I'd hit record, I'd do a couple of takes. The one I felt was good, I just upload it. I didn't edit, I didn't stop. I was just like,
Wow.
upload, just go, get out of here. Like, because otherwise I'm gonna think about it and then it's not gonna go up. That's what I learned.
Oh, I think I've had a little bit of a leg up in this thing. I think because I've been acting for so long.
Hmm.
So when you like, and especially like with auditions, you just go do it once or twice in the room and then you leave and you don't hear anything or you hear everything. But the industry has gone to self tapes, which is like, for those of you who aren't actors, that basically means that you get an audition, you get the sides, the scene, and you're filming it yourself in your home, and then you send a tape. And like when I was first doing that, oh my God, was I hypercritical. I was redoing it like 80,000 times.
Yeah,
And now it's like, all right, let's just do it 3 times. All right. I said, yeah, that's good. Send it. Because it's just like, it's not a matter of like the work is there. Like I trust that I did the work and I did something
right.
interesting. And you just got to put it up there and you just put it out there and see what happens and see what lands. There's
Yeah.
so many factors that are out of your control. The only thing you're in control of is the active creation and process. And once you find the path to embrace that, it all becomes much more enjoyable, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So my final question is,
Please.
this film has gotten incredible response. And
Yeah.
so like what has that been for you to like know that you created something and then people are loving it? Like, because
Yeah.
I'm always worried people are just gonna hate everything I do. Even though I know it's good, I'm just like, I love it, but I don't know if anyone else will. So
Yeah, I mean, look, if I'm being real right now, it's been an emotional roller coaster. It's surreal. I mean, the fact that you can open up your phone, go on, Max and stream my film, and you'll be able to do that for years is crazy. The fact that people could buy tickets to go see it in a theater is crazy to me. The fact that I got to make it is crazy. This story, the way we did it is
right.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's surreal. I mean, it's like there are moments where it feels like unreal and there are moments where it feels really real. um it's been wild. It's for all those artists out there. I mean, you will resonate with this. I mean, it's an act of courage and bravery to put yourself out there and put your work out there. And I think for me, it's what's filling my tank and my heart is when people watch it and they get it. It resonates with them. They see what I'm trying to do, and it's really working for them in a fundamental way. When someone like you, putting words in your mouth, but like you felt seen,
Hmm.
and like people have been saying that, like, oh, I feel seen for the first time. I love that I'm adding nuance to the conversation of what is the South Asian diaspora. I love when non-South Asians like the movie. That makes me feel real great because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, great. That means like you're just seeing us as humans and people. I love when conversations get started about the political stuff that the film touches on, and
Mm,
like, child separation and what is it to be a brown person and like in relation to other communities, and what is immigrant, so it's a surreal feeling. It's a big feeling of pride. Like I do feel like it's funny because the film is about a man learning to be a dad. And I feel like a proud dad, like for all my team members that made this film a reality, right? Like
Right.
I've already mentioned a bunch of them, but then also like Aiden Reynolds, who did our sound, and like, Emily Cho, who edited this film beautifully.
Mm.
Like the only time we met physically was when we premiered the film at the Tribeca Festival last year, because she lives in London. So we were working remotely the whole
Oh
time.
wow.
Very like intense period because we didn't have a lot of time. Robert Uncles, who did the VFX for this film, like the Cherokee Nation. So like that's another cool thing, right? Like this film about hyphenate Americans was helped in part by First Nations folks.
Hmm.
All the driving sequences, the telescope scene, that was all filmed in studio on an LED wall that the Cherokee Nation provided. Which is
Wow.
amazing that I can say that, like, yo, this was about a South Asian American, Mexican American, and First Nations Americans, made this movie possible. So like I just have this like really big sense of pride and joy that the film is reaching its audiences and people are resonating with it. It just really makes me happy that people are finding something about it. And like, you know, I've had some conversations where people are like, yeah, I know, man, like that dad scene, the scene I'm talking about, like that
Yeah.
and like people are like calling their dads and like saying sorry to their mom for acting out and like speaking poorly to their moms, and also just like the sort of like subtle intersectionalities, like Preeti's South Indian in the
Right.
film, like when Kieran's obviously North Indian, so like even that within our community and like that stuff,
Yeah.
complicated nature.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot I think that people are finding in the film,
Right.
and I'm really like overjoyed when it's connecting with people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible because you kind of like obviously oversimplify it, but when you do it like that, it's like it's a it's about a man who's about to become a dad, and like it's like that's such an oversimplification, but like there's so much to it, right? Like just that one log line is not enough to encompass all these things that you mentioned and more.
Yeah.
And like you said, like hearing the word Sikh and hearing Guru Nanak in conversation, hearing Punjabi, that was huge for me. I didn't even mention that, but like normally you're hearing Hindi or you're hearing other South Asian languages and
Yeah.
it's fine, but it's like hearing like Punjabi on like this film, I was just it took me a second when I first heard it watching the movie because I was just like, I've never heard Punjabi in a film, like in an American film like that. Like it's just like so.
It filled me with pride too when so Ritti Sachdeva, who plays Ravina, my mother in the film,
Mhm.
she's so fantastic in this film. She like breathes this, like she's also not like the typical Punjabi like mom, you know what I mean? Like, which I
Mhm.
love. Like she's clearly spiritual. She's had an awakening. Like she has all the Punjabi mom stuff, but then also like she's clearly someone you want to get like a beer with or something. Um, she just brought so much light to the film, and her performance is so beautiful. And Iqbal Teba, who's a legend again, I mentioned him, he plays Gurinder so beautifully. Like when they started speaking Punjabi and speaking Punjabi together, I just was like, it was weird.
Right.
It's weird because I've never been on a set. I've never seen that before and
Right.
heard it. And I just was like, whoa, like I was being transported back to my home, like growing up. And then like I was like, oh, this is really cool because like Kieran doesn't speak Punjabi. He does, but he doesn't use it,
Yeah.
right? So, like, it's just like cool. This like, yeah, like having those experiences on set, which mirrored like life and everything, I just thought was really beautiful. So I'm glad that like that resonated with you. Like, it's also just like some of the stuff is not like, like they're the Mog TK. Like that's like something like you get it. Like you've probably
Yeah.
heard that growing up like all the time,
Oh yeah.
like the little jokes that we had Ravina say like in Punjabi, some
Yeah.
that were translated, some that were not, like just like make me so happy because yeah, that again, it's that specificity and nuance within the experience that like, I had the honor to be able to present in this film, and I think that's something that you asked like for your prior question of like how does it feel? I think for Punjabis, I think that's the thing I'm really happy about. Like when y'all are like feeling seen and you're like, oh yeah, my mom says that, my dad says that. Oh yeah, we've had these issues in our family. Or like, oh yeah, I mean, this is, that I'm like, yeah, like I feel like I did a good job. I feel like
Yeah.
if this is like one of our first major representations in film in like this style of like filmmaking, I feel like I did a good job.
Yeah.
And I feel like now it's like your turn to make your film, and
Yeah.
like one up me, right? And like do better and do your version, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said in my video, I said already, like, I think, this was a really huge deal for exploring the Sikh faith, which is huge for me. I didn't even get to talk about it, but like that element where you're explaining basically ikonkar. You don't say
Yeah.
it, but you're explaining ikonkar. And when I heard it I was like, oh wow, that's never been done before in like at least in American film, maybe in like Bollywood films, but like the way it was done and like the way it was done in a manner that people could understand it, right? Like you use language and context that could make sense to anybody. And
Yeah.
like again, even if they don't agree or believe, it's just like, okay, I can understand that belief, you know? And that was the part that I just loved because I was like, I've been talking about ikonkar oneness a lot in my as since I've learned it in the last few years, because even I
Yeah.
grew up with ikonkar means one god, and it's like no,
Right.
it's so much more like all encompassing than that, and so much
Yeah.
beyond that. And so like I've used like pretty much those exact words in conversation, so when the character was saying them, I was just like, oh shoot, that's so crazy.
It's wild. So when I was writing that, I didn't have that in my head.
Mm,
I just was like, this is what he would say to her. And like I mean, we talked about it earlier, like this idea that this stuff just bleeds through you.
yeah.
It was I don't know if it was my mom or if it was like I forget exactly who was like, oh, you just explained that. And I was like, what? And I didn't even realize I had done it. I didn't realize that like this whole beautiful monologue that's like helping this young woman like reconcile why God would do bad things. Like, and then his like whole like connection to how he sees the universe, which his dad gave to him, and like
Yeah.
right, this all makes sense. Like again, it's all in us. And it
Mm-hmm.
all like again, it's like this idea of like how do you tell characters of color? You inform their culture informs them. It doesn't define them. And in like
Right.
this weird roundabout way, it wound up connecting to like another major tenet of the faith without having to even mention it. And but like that you recognize it is like everything for me, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. I mean, it, I think that's such a cool parallel that you have with like even with the character of Kieran, things were bleeding through, right? Things were just, and it's similar here. Like I think that's just like because yeah, we grew up with it and we hear these things and maybe we don't hold on to them consciously, but they are put inside of us. They are ingrained in us, and then they come out in their own ways when we want or need them most. You know.
Totally. I mean, like I joke, right? Like, I still wear the kara. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's important to me. And I joke with people, I'm like, I'm not religious, but I'm glad I was born a Sikh. And because I just think that the faith, what it's teaching is like what is absolutely necessary, right? And it's
Yeah.
make yourself of service, take care of your brother, your sister, your family, your
Mm-hmm.
friends, and like just and like it's just like the basic stuff.
Right.
And um I don't know. I don't know why I bring that up, but I just am like I may not be like going to Gurdwara or anything like that, but I do consider myself Sikh, and I do feel like I am living those tenets of Guru Nanak. Like
Sure.
there was a really cool exhibit actually. I was doing a play in Arizona,
Uh-huh.
and I think it was at the Phoenix Museum. They did a Guru Nanak retrospective, and it was like Punjabi art from like old and from back in the day, but then also contemporary art about Guru Nanak. And I never experienced it in an art form. Like I had already like you hear the teachings, you hear
Yeah.
it, but like my grandfather is a sick, scholar and very like, he would teach me about this stuff growing up, but like seeing it in art and in painting and seeing his teachings presented that way connected to me in such a real way.
Yeah.
And like I was with a friend and they were like, "Oh, this is just the same stuff Jesus said." And I'm like, "Kind of."
Yeah.
It's just that we don't say he's God. He's just like he just was a G, you know?
Yeah.
And it like I was looking at this, I'm like, oh my God, this stuff is so inside me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so happy that that's the good stuff that's inside me. Like I've retained all that good stuff. Like the complicated stuff, the stuff that I have a complicated relationship with the faith, like I've let go of that. But like the
Sure.
good stuff, but the stuff that matters
Yeah.
is all in there. And like, Yeah, that's just like me personally, but I think that happens. I think that film explores that too with Kieran, where he just like realizes like he doesn't even realize it consciously. He's just like living his life, but then he's inherently doing the right things,
Yeah.
which is also like answers his question of like, am I going to be a good father? Yeah, you got all the tools. Now it's just like do it, do the job.
Yeah, I appreciate this so much. Congratulations on like the success of the film.
Thank you,
You
brother.
know, it's again like as a Sikh who talks a lot about the faith and really wants to help people understand it so that the stories that Gideon and his father experience can change, right? And you know,
Yeah.
so you can it's huge for me. And like on one like final note, the like you were saying at the very beginning, like maybe it's a little unbelievable that he would just help this little girl. I've asked people to share stories with me of like Sikhs helping them, and the
Yeah.
stories that have people have commented and messaged me, unbelievable. And these are complete strangers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, they're complete strangers. And that's like, but that's the thing, right? Like it's in us. Like we're taught to do this. Again,
yeah,
it's the concept of seva. It's service. Like
yeah.
that's what we're here. You need help. Like, let's do it. We're
Actually, very similar story to the movie. It wasn't maybe not as similar, but they told me that a Sikh truck driver drove them 2 hours and then they had to drive 2 hours back for to like I don't know, they needed help, they needed to get dropped off somewhere, but
right.
truck driver was just like okay, took them 2 hours and they had to drive back 2 hours to wherever they had to like, and it's just like or like this other person they they saw that like they were there it was an Uber cab driver, the Sikh was like Uber cab driver, and they saw that the person like the guy that was with this woman was not, you know, whatever, like suspicious or whatever. So
Sure.
like once the woman got out, he like locked the doors and wouldn't let him out, you know. And then it's just like things like that, like
Yeah.
the most. And I have a whole video, I can share the video with you actually, because the comments are filled, like
Please.
hundreds of comments of people just like, oh, I this random like I asked this Sikh for help and like they helped me find my mom in a store, whatever, like these from
I
like
love
the
that.
most like not most but like more benign to like really extreme scary situations like
Yeah.
Sikh have been helping. And so it's just like it's not unbelievable. Like anybody who knows a Sikh is won't find it unbelievable is my point.
Yeah, that's I mean, I completely agree with you, right? Like it just makes sense. Like, yeah, he doesn't and like I love that's what the thing about the film. He doesn't even realize he's making those choices.
Yeah,
He's doing what he feels is necessary.
yeah,
And like I think that's like what most Sikhs would do. I
yeah,
mean, like I even like in the large scale, like I think about the Syrian refugee crisis and how they a bunch of Sikhs like went and made a langar on the
yeah,
border so people could have bread and water and milk and food
yeah,
because they were journeying,
yeah.
like they put
Same.
themselves in like a dangerous place to be able to just like help people.
Yeah, yeah. There's organizations, Sikh organizations that have gone. Also, like with Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
Like all any pretty much any disaster, like natural disaster relief effort.
Yeah.
Sikhs are there, and so it's not like I get that some people are big. That's kind of wild, but like if anybody that understands even like the basics of Sikhi, I
Yeah.
don't think they would be too surprised. Like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, yeah. That that's what happened to me.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I so appreciate this. Hopefully we can keep in touch. You know, I just love to keep exchanging thoughts and ideas and just, you know, seeing your progress. I want to see the next film. Hopefully it goes deeper.
I mean, I'm working on it. And please, anything I can do to support you and your journey, like I'm here. We're family now.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I so appreciate this opportunity to chat. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation.